So thank you all for coming along this afternoon. I hope you've had a useful day so far. We're going to be talking about scholarships and bursaries and what's actually available out there in a landscape which is ever changing. I'm lucky enough to be joined this afternoon by Laura Bursey Faulkner. She's at Rugby School. She's the deputy head there. Laura joined Rugby in 2022, having been a housemistress and a music teacher at Benenden School. So music scholarships are something which are very close to Laura's heart. And she's got to whiz back up to Rugby after the talk today to talk about scholarships at Rugby. So this is something which is very big in Laura's head at the moment. Is that
Absolutely
a reasonable summary? I've got Dominic Mott over there on my left. He's come up from Hurstpierpoint in Sussex today. Dominic's been head of Hurst since 2022, joined the school in 2015. He did a spell at Sandhurst after leaving school. Not the only head who has a bit of Sandhurst on their CV. They went to Cambridge and on to Highgate and Sevenoaks schools before joining Hurst. We are really lucky today because actually between Laura and Dominic, they have a wealth of experience with scholarships and bursaries, both on a professional and personal level. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what they have to tell us. I'm interested to start, if it's not too gloomy, with a big question which will be on everybody's mind, which is how much does it actually cost nowadays to educate a child privately? And I suppose by extension, what are scholarships and bursaries and how might they help with that? Dominic, do you want to start?
Shall we start? I've brought a prop with me, and this is the ISCs. This is there's an essential bedtime reading for any of you who struggle with insomnia. And this is every bit of data about independent schools. It's produced every year, but I thought I'd bring it because it actually gives some really good data about scholarships and bursaries, and I'll explain the difference in a moment. But also about fees, if I just turn the page. And the average, this is the average boarding fee, is about £14,000 a term plus VAT, and the average day fee is about £8,000 a term plus VAT. But within that, there is such a huge range, and that depends from full boarding, for example, down to day schools in perhaps areas of the country where things are a little bit cheaper. So you'll find a huge variety. Of course, the VAT situation has also been dealt with by schools in many different ways. There are some schools who have passed on pretty much the full 20%, and others who have cut costs and really tried hard to protect their parental body from that impact. So I think it's a very fast changing situation, but broadly speaking, if you're getting any change from 30 grand a year for a day place, you've done pretty well. And you can easily spend 50, 55, 60,000 pounds a year on boarding if you go for the full fat option of full boarding.
Laura, does that sound about right to you? Does that chime with your experience?
Very much so. When I was doing a bit of homework for today, the first word I wrote down was there's a range. We're acutely aware in the sector that there's enormous pressure on parents to be able to fund private education, and it's a commodity which we're very proud of. Maybe commodity is not the right word. I know Dominic and I have both benefited from being in the private school sector, and by very default committed our careers to being in the private school sector. We really believe in it. And I would say that the schools have responded really actively and positively to that. We are seeking to work with and support our parents, exploring all avenues of philanthropic gifting and looking at the structure of development and gifting and generous alumni. And I think it's important to say that certainly in the case of Rugby, no school fee pays for a bursary place. We can talk about that later to make that explanation, but I think that's a really important point to make, that you don't want parents thinking that their fees are funding another person's place at the school. But I would say, all things considered, once you've got the information, once you've got the facts, you've been through the assessment process, there's always a conversation to be had with the schools. If you've got a child who is a really good match for that child, you've been on a journey, you think that it's going to work really well, they've done well in the assessment process, the school genuinely likes your child, there's always a conversation to be had.
So for parents who are at the beginning of this process then, and who haven't yet started the admissions testing and perhaps even registering their children at schools yet, when should that conversation with the school start? Because actually, it sounds from what you're saying, Laura, like a parent might be quite a long way down the process before they start talking to you about fee support. What's the ideal moment for a parent to begin that conversation with the school?
I would say as early as possible. And that's partly because it may be a school that says, look, I'm afraid in this environment we're not able to find a great deal of funding for bursaries and scholarships, whereas other schools who are in a stronger position may completely welcome you in and say, absolutely, we want to support you and your child. And I think it's such a complex market. We'll talk about the different ways that our schools do scholarships and bursaries, and although we have a lot in common, we also differ quite considerably. Actually, at Hurst, a significant amount of our bursarial funding currently does come from fee income, albeit we're trying to change that picture as we rely on donations and fundraising in order to provide that endowment fund, which some older schools, you take a Christ Hospital for example, that really is their model, where I think 80 or 90% of the children are expecting to go for a place there with some sort of fee assistance, as opposed to other schools, particularly those perhaps that are a little bit more pressed financially, where they're just not in a position to be able to give that help. But right from the start is the short answer.
Can I just pick up on that very quickly to test a commonly held understanding on you? Is it true that the big old brackets, often boys' schools, have more fee assistance available? Because I think that's something which a lot of parents hear, that the local girls' day school is unlikely to have pockets as deep as the full boys' boarding school down the road. Is that true?
I think it's true to a certain extent, by very default, that the nation didn't educate women in the 1500s. It just wasn't done. I stand here as a huge champion of educating girls, having been at an all-girls school and worked at all-girls schools for a number of years. I find myself at fundamentally a sort of a boys' school foundation, and interestingly, Rugby School was founded as a free grammar school for the boys of Rugby and Brownsover, which is a suburb outside of Rugby, from its inception. So in terms of offering free places, it's absolutely runs through the DNA of Rugby, and we've been very fortunate in terms of the school's history that we owned a plot of land in Bloomsbury. It's now known as Lamb's Conduit Street, so we still own that, and a lot of the rent from the businesses that operate along that street feed directly into our bursary provision. We've been very fortunate as a school. We've made some good investments from the finance side, and we're really, that's a huge part of the purpose and ethos of the school, is that we have a deep sense of service and charity towards future education of our students. But that's obviously is typical of those original 7 schools. The Clarendon 7, if you struggle with insomnia, do look it up on Google. It's actually very interesting. And Rugby is one of the original 7 schools, joined later by 2 day schools, and then it turned into the Clarendon 9, I think. But, when I was at Cheltenham Ladies, that was actually quite a historic school that founded in 1856, I think it was. So by the default of the number of years that it's been going, we've got a longer legacy of gifting, alumni, legacy pledges, etc.
Yeah, I think I'd add 2 points to that. The first is a stat that, again, comes from my very handy Bible here, which is that 34% of children in independent schools last year were in some form of receipt of fee assistance, whether that be means-tested bursarial, whether that be a scholarship. So that's over a third of children are receiving some sort of bursaries. They aren't all at the big name, famous old schools that have been around for hundreds of years. And I think the second thing to say is that there are some schools where, from a commercial perspective, they actually see scholarships in particular and discounting as a very effective way of making sure that their numbers are stable. And there'll be some schools who would rather have 80% of the fee from somebody who can't afford the last 20% than not have that child at all. And again, that's why the conversations are so important, particularly in schools that aren't oversubscribed, because you'll often find that there is an opportunity there, and they want your child, they want to educate these children, they want to be full. Every school, every head wants a full school, but we acknowledge that, particularly in this day and age, not every single parent is able to pay the full fees, particularly with the VAT. So always a conversation to be had, and certainly not just in the old established schools.
That's really encouraging, thank you. Can we just, I think before we go any further, we just need to do a bit of jargon busting. Could you just sort of define, please, in each of your schools, because as you'll be understanding, there are different definitions of this across the sector and different schools handling this in different ways. But what is a bursary and what is a scholarship?
Shall I go first?
You go first.
I'll go first. Okay. All I'm going to talk about here is how we define it. If anybody would like a copy of this booklet, I've got a few more over at the Hurst stand, and this explains how we treat the two things. Firstly, then, a scholarship for us is all about a child's innate ability, and we have three different pathways. There's the academic scholarship, there's a performing arts scholarship, and it's a sports scholarship. And it's a way of acknowledging a child who is exceptional in one or more of those areas. And that really means for an academic that they're going to be on course for getting 9s and A stars, perhaps going on to one of the top universities in the country. For a sports scholar, it's perhaps somebody who's playing county level sport or perhaps has been picked to be on the England pathway for something. And for a performing arts scholar, it might be a child aged 13 who perhaps is already grade 8 in a couple of instruments, or who is constantly on stage and taking the lead part. So it's talent, it's ability, and it's a recognition of a child that really stands out in their particular field. And for us, that scholarship recognises their talent and it puts them onto a pathway, which is an extension and an enrichment programme, which gives them opportunities. For example, our drama scholars get Lambda lessons as part of their package. Our sports scholars get strength and conditioning sessions and one-on-one mentoring. And if they're a rugby player, they might have, conversion kicking practice. If they're a cricketer, they might have one-on-one cricket nets. So that's all built into the provision that we provide. We have moved away from any money coming off the fees for scholarships per se. So for us, it's a recognition of a child's talent, and then it is a pathway to really enrich that talent. But what it does for us is it then entitles that family to apply for a bursary. And for us, bursaries are a completely separate issue. You can only get a bursary if your child has a scholarship, but then it is entirely means tested and needs blind. So we might offer let's say a sports scholarship to a child, not knowing what sort of level of fee assistance is required. And once that offer has been made, then we use an external company called BAL, and we can talk about how that works a little later. And then they will look at the family's finances and decide how much it would be appropriate for us to support that child. There's then one other type of bursary, which is a hardship bursary, and that is for families who have joined the school, they've invested in their child's education, and then perhaps have fallen on hard times. So perhaps a parent has been made redundant, or maybe there might be a long-term illness in the family. And at that point, we would then make a commitment to seeing that child through their journey, certainly to the end of GCSEs, possibly to A-levels, depending on their age. And that wouldn't require a child to have a scholarship, but we feel that it's the right thing to do to continue them on a bursary.
Thanks. Laura?
Very similar in principle, but just a few other options in terms of the scholarship provision. So we have 7 scholarships that we offer at 13 plus and at 16 plus. Let's make sure that I get them all right. Academic, sport, performing arts, music, art, design, technology and computer science. And again, as Dominic said, their recognition for the child's performance in that scholarship assessment, and that opens the door for families to have a means tested process. The same company that, and lots of schools use BAL, and again they do their independent assessment and then make recommendations to the school. Rugby School also offers an Arnold Foundation, which is exclusively a boarding award, which recognises a good fit for students for Rugby School, but where there is a need to board. So it's more of a sort of pastoral need to board. They, by context, they might be of a challenging socio-economic background, but got very high CAT scores, or can see that an opportunity at Rugby School would be a transformational opportunity for this child. And we often work in partnership with the likes of Springboard or Inter-University, who make the recommendations to us. And I know that other schools work with these companies, these organisations as well, to make recommendations. So we seek to place around about 7 students a year in 13 plus and 16 plus on the Arnold Foundation, which is a transformational sort of 100% plus opportunity. The 100% plus means that the fees are covered, the board is covered, but then the uniform, the the textbooks, the opportunity to go on educational trips which support the academic experience at Rugby. So those are the options. And then one other thing that we have, which is going back to my first comment about from Rugby's inception in 1567, is a foundation award. It's all very confusing at Rugby. Everything's called foundational awards, so I'm really sorry. And like Dominic said, if you wanted to have more clarity on this, come and talk to us on the stand. We can help it. It's taken me a number of years to get my head around it, but the foundation is principally a day award, and that's recognition on academic performance in our assessments and for students who live within a 20-mile radius. And again, that's with a need for some financial assistance. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I think it's worth pointing out, particularly for parents looking at London day schools, that actually the ring fencing of fee assistance for scholars is increasingly unusual in the sector. It's coincidence, really, that we have representatives here from two schools where fee assistance is limited to those who hold scholarships. In a lot of schools now, most schools I'd even say now, the scholarships conversation is one conversation, and the bursary conversation is completely different. So if you're looking at, for example, a lot of the academic London day schools, then your child, in order to access bursary support, theoretically only needs to have passed that admissions test. So don't be disheartened if you think you will need some bursary support, but your child isn't yet grade 8 violin or playing county level cricket. There are lots and lots of schools out there where those two conversations have become more removed than it happens that they are here.
I'd agree with that. And I think at the other end of that extreme, there are also plenty of schools out there who will give you £1,000 a term off the fees if you've got a very bright child, even if you've got 7 Lamborghinis and a Swiss ski chalet. And that's their approach. We've chosen not to do that because we believe that it is fairer to reallocate that money to those who really need it, rather than just giving an extra bottle of Chateau Lafite or whatever to wealthy parents. But every school will have different values and a different approach, and also will be competing in a different commercial environment. And there are some schools who use scholarships and bursaries as a way of enticing children in. For us, it's more about recognising talent and trying to broaden access. And there's no rights or wrongs to either approach, but different schools will want to see this differently.
I agree completely.
Great. We're all in agreement. Hooray. Laura, I know there's a directory, a Music Teachers Association directory for parents who want to find out about music scholarships. Are there other directories or other sources of information, sort of centrally organised sources of information for parents to find out about other scholarships or bursaries?
I think MTA is a good starting point for sure. It used to be called something else, and now it's called the Music Teachers Association, I think. And it's a really good starting point. I think music is one of those incredible subjects where the differentiation from a very young age is very, very apparent. And what I mean by that is you might have some very, very sort of prodigy-like gifted musicians who might be grade 8 diploma level in 7 and 8 in violin, piano, etc. And the pathway for them is very, very niche and very much perhaps a specialist music school, one of the 4 specialist music schools, and then going on to a music conservatoire or music college. For us at Rugby, and I'm sure it's the same at Hurst and a lot of the other schools who really place an equal emphasis on the academic credentials of the school, so really ensuring that the academic provision for each child is explored, is tapped into, the child has that support to really make sure they maximise on their academic potential. But in equal measure, you have the co-curricular support, so whether that's music, performing arts, drama, sport, science, coding, whatever it is, we like to make sure that there is a pathway for our excellent students who are academically very, very able, talented, but they have a real passion, interest and talent in a co-curricular concern. So we can provide the springboard from which then they can tap into junior academies, junior places at the Royal Colleges or Guildhall or Birmingham Conservatoire, have places on pathways with all of the local sports companies. I know that all of our schools will have students who are on a pathway with Saints or with cricket, Warwickshire, Northampton. I'm speaking from a Midlands context at the moment, but I know geographically it will be happening at all the schools around, whether it's Kent, whether it's Somerset, whether it's Warwickshire, whether it's Yorkshire, etc. But then the third really important piece to that is that every decision we make as a school in the private sector is very much child-centric, and it's making sure that the child is at the centre of every decision that we make, and that giving the opportunity for them and making sure that it's a really good fit and it's possibly a transformational opportunity for them to really make the best of their time in education. And I speak very personally as well, as a benefactor of a music scholarship at my school, and it being genuinely a transformational experience. And I think Dominic might have had a similar experience.
Yeah, I was an academic scholar at Shrewsbury, one of the Clarendon 7, you'll be pleased to know, to go back to our little bit of niche history there. Everyone else has absolutely no clue what we're talking about. Google it. Yeah. But that entitled my parents to get 50% off the fees, which allowed me to go to one of the best schools in the country, and I've reaped the rewards of that, and I think both of us are thoroughly invested in this because we've seen the impact that these transformational bursaries and scholarships can have.
You mentioned this before, Dominic, about how, or BAL, in fact you've both mentioned BAL now, and how they go about assessing a family's finances for a means-tested bursary. I think a lot of parents, understandably, find that quite an invasive process, or sort of surprisingly intimate, actually, being asked to reveal everything to a school that at the same time you may be going through a competitive entrance process for. And I just want to point out absolutely sort of very firmly at this stage that there is the point of BAL and organisations like BAL, where schools have outsourced their means testing to BAL, is that nobody in the school's admissions office is ever going to see your bank statements, right? That's none of their business. That's why they have asked an outside organisation to deal with this for them. And BAL are incredibly professional and very, very discreet, as you would expect. So it's not that the person interviewing your child also knows, how much you spent at Tesco's last week. It's not like that. That conversation is never linked. But still, it feels quite personal. How does that process work then? And what will they ask for from parents?
Great. And I'd really echo that. I really try and have a dividing line between my relationship with applicant parents and then that the financial arrangements are done separately, and my chief financial officer liaises with BAL. So all I get is a recommendation, and I can link that to my knowledge of the child and the family. So we are not going to be going through your Tesco receipts. That is absolutely true. So BAL will ask you to fill in some forms. Some of it is pretty high-level stuff. It's things like the value of your home, whether you've got mortgages, any second properties, the cars that you drive. It will look at your income, but it will also look at expenditure and future expenditure as well. I think one of the things that people perhaps don't understand is that it isn't just about how much money you do or don't earn. It's looking at the whole lifestyle. So, for example, there might be a family who actually might have a six-figure household income, but potentially have 3 children that they want to put through independent school and a large mortgage that they've got to pay. Well, realistically, their disposable income just simply isn't going to cover that. And so BAL will make a really balanced and very impartial recommendation, which then comes through to us, which will be anything from 0 fee remission through to 100 or even 110%. If it would be useful, and I suspect I'm going to sell out of these pretty quickly, right at the back of this, we've got, I think, 5 or 6 different scenarios, so case studies, where we've put some fictitious imaginary numbers to a particular set of family situations so that you can see, roughly speaking, the likely outcome. But it is very much individual, and very often there's underlying health reasons, or there is a mortgage, or there is a relocation or some other factor, which means that it isn't quite as simple as just a very linear, this is what you earn, and therefore that's the cut-off.
Can I ask, Laura, you may be able to answer these. Can I ask about 3 very precise scenarios that I find come up a lot in conversations that I have with families about bursaries? 1, grandparents. What if there are grandparents on one side or the other who could cough up but don't want to? How do schools look at that? Is that involved, that bit of the conversation?
From my understanding, it depends on their influence and their responsibilities as a grandparent. So in a normal family setting where the grandparents don't have any legal responsibility or guardian responsibility over the children, then there would be no need for them to be involved in the financial assessment. But where the grandparents, and correct me if I'm wrong, where the grandparents are very much involved and have legal responsibilities, then their financial circumstances will very much be included in that assessment.
That's really helpful, thank you. And I assume the same logic applies to parents who have separated or are divorced. If one parent is keen to educate the children privately, the other one doesn't want to contribute, it's a scenario sadly we've all seen, how would that be looked at?
Again, that's very much on a case-by-case basis,
okay.
And there is no one answer, because sadly where parents are separated, there's no one pathway, there's no one outcome. It's either very amicable or incredibly acrimonious. Where there's court orders or restrictions involved, it gets very tricky, and I couldn't say that there's one. We've got a whole range, as I'm sure Dominic does. We have the whole range, so it's very much on a case-by-case basis.
It is. I think the one thing I'd add to that is that in those contentious situations where there is some wrangling over custody, possibly, as well as the finances, we try and put the child at the centre of that, and we try not to let money be another source of friction between parents who, if they're estranged and their marriage is broken up, are probably not necessarily on the best of terms with one another, and that could have obviously pastoral implications for the child. So that's again somewhere where we're charities, we're able to look out for the child's best interest, and if that means putting our hand in our pocket, even though one parent possibly could be contributing a bit more, if that will lead to more family strife, then that's not in the interest of the child.
Thanks, that's really helpful. So actually it sounds like it's very human, the whole process.
And very human, and as Dominic said, every part of being in education is child-centric. 100%.
The last scenario that I get asked about often is business ownership. So, if one or both of the parents owns a business, runs a business, is self-employed, how would BAL look at the money that might be in that business but effectively available to the parents?
In the same way as HMRC would. So it's effectively, if you do a self-assessment tax return because you're self-employed or because you are a director of a business, then that is not only your asset, but it is also potentially your income. If you're, for example, if your business pays dividends to you in lieu of a salary. So it shouldn't really be any different than the tax that you pay to HMRC.
Fine, great, thank you. Does it help, do you think, across the sector, if you've got two applicants and one wants bursary support and the other one doesn't, and how does it affect the admissions process and the decision making involved? Is it not the case, surely, and I know I said before that this should be completely removed from the picture, but surely, particularly in this landscape, the child whose parents are able to pay 100% of the fees, as opposed to the child whose parents can't, how as a school do you make those decisions? What do you do about that?
I can speak on behalf of us, and again I'm going to say it again, the financial aspect of assessment is very, very confidential and discreet, so the admission staff would not know the detail of the process of a bursary application. So if you've got child A and child B, the admissions staff wouldn't necessarily know which child needs the bursary support, because that process is done confidentially through the finance department. And you might find that child A, who doesn't need the bursary support, is actually not as doesn't perform as high as well as child B, who does need the financial support. So you might get the faculty departments who are really fighting for the child and they don't know the financial assessment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
thank you.
Very similar. We will make our offers based on places, but also scholarships based on talent and ability. And then it's a completely separate conversation. We obviously do have a limited pool. There's only a certain amount of funds available. So it may well be that there are some children who have received a scholarship, but that, let's say there are 100 children all bidding for a bursary, we may not be able to meet the needs of every single family in that case. But that doesn't affect the admissions process.
Great. Thank you. I've got one final question, then we're going to open it up to your questions, if that's okay, which is, how do you ensure in your schools that culturally those children who are there on fee support don't feel like they are not, all the Swiss ski chalet issue? How do those children feel, do you think, being the only people who aren't going off to the Maldives for October half term?
I think if you were to
There's
meet
no one going to the Maldives
if you
anymore.
were to meet the parental body at my school, I don't think there's many Lamborghinis and there's certainly not many Swiss chalets.
Really is that something that parents have to factor in? What do you do about that as a parent?
And that's a really interesting one when looking at the school and the profile of the school. There are some schools, mine is one, where pretty much all the fee-paying parents, those who are not even in receipt of fee assistance at all, both parents are working full-time. The biggest cost in their whole lives is the independent education of their child. They're driving a battered 15-year-old car. They're mortgaged up to the hilt. That's the reality for most of our families. There are schools out there that are a bit glitzier, a bit glossier, a bit more sort of A-lister, where parents sort of come in the chauffeur-driven Bentley. If that's not the sort of environment you want your child to go in, then maybe go for a slightly more grounded school that can still offer the bursarial support. I think there's two things I'd say. The first is it's a little bit of a misconception that somehow all children in receipt of bursaries are on these 100 or 110% transformational bursaries. Some are, and those are fantastic, but the vast majority are actually hardworking middle-class parents who just need the extra 10, 20, 30, 40% in order to make up the fees. So actually the difference in lifestyle isn't necessarily vast. I think the second thing is, for those children who do come from backgrounds where there really aren't the means to be able to buy the clothes and the uniform and the games kit and to go on the trips, we provide that. And that's where the 100% plus bursaries come in. And we have a number of these children where if they want to go on the cricket tour to South Africa, we pay for them to go on the cricket tour to South Africa. And if they haven't got enough money for a cricket bat, we buy them the cricket bat. And I think that's really important. In my school, you will not see children wearing their own clothes. Boarders, day pupils, all week round, they're either wearing their uniform or they're wearing their Hurst sports kit. That's it. You won't see jeans, you won't see T-shirts, you won't see hoodies. They just wear our kit, which means there is no distinction between those who are wearing all the Gucci and those who are, like me, shopping in Matalan, or the middle of Lidl. If you haven't been, try it. Because actually, it's a real leveller, and I think that's really important.
Laura, Gucci at Rugby.
Gucci at Rugby.
What's everyone wearing to breakfast at Rugby?
I completely agree with Dominic. I'll only add one other fashion item at Rugby, which is pyjamas. And if you ever come to Rugby, and I hope you will do, there is a culture of, we have long skirts for the girls, and that in itself is brilliant because we don't have the battle of the short skirt and girls rolling the skirt up above the knee. It's just long, but the girls wear their pyjamas underneath. In the winter, it gets quite chilly, and it's a fashion statement. But they tend to wear their pyjamas. They do occasionally wear their home clothes, but it's so much a leveller. We've got the huge range of bursary award holders at Rugby. We've got people on 0%, we've got people on 100%. And again, circle round right to what I said, it's inherent in the culture at Rugby that, and many other schools, that it's a very inclusive, supportive and kind environment that every person who's at our school have earned their place fair and square, irrespective of their socioeconomic background. And we really want to drill down that is the priority, that the child, irrespective of their financial circumstances, has earned their place as much as the next person.
True story. I got for Christmas a pair of Lidl pyjamas.
You should have worn them.
Enough of us. You'll have some questions, I'm sure. Some of the questions that you will have relating to bursaries will be very personal to your family's circumstances. And I appreciate that you may not want to ask those questions in front of everybody else, but also that they may not be relevant to anybody else. So I would encourage you to come and chat to one of us afterwards, or indeed to any of the schools here, about your own personal circumstances. But if anybody has any questions which might be useful to the group more widely, then we'd love to hear them.
Hi. Are there any bursaries for primary schools students? And if there are, what year do they start normally? Because it seems to be quite a lot, given for 11 plus and further on. But, you know, what about the bright kids who are struggling?
A really great question. The answer is there will be some schools who do that. We don't bring in bursarial support until age 11, so year 7. And that's for a number of reasons. One of which is it's very, very hard to make a really good objective assessment of a child until that sort of age and be sure that they're going to keep that funding all the way through. And the last thing I want to do is to attempt to identify a really bright child age 6 and put them onto a bursary of 30-40%, and the parents think, wow, this is fantastic, we're sending our child to this school, only then for us to question that child's academic trajectory a few years later and realise maybe they weren't quite as talented as we thought. And particularly in things like sport, where their growth and their development is just so volatile, particularly as they go through puberty, age sort of 11, 12, 13, it can be quite hard to predict. So we tend to say 11 is about the youngest that we can be confident we're going to get it right. That said, there will be some schools. I suppose that the other point to make is that financially, senior schools tend to be in a stronger financial position than prep schools and through schools with a large primary contingent, and therefore there's perhaps a little bit more to go around than in those very cash-strapped schools where money's very tight.
You might find regionally that there be prep schools that have exceptional award provision, and that would be something to take up with the schools in your immediate environment, in your region, and tap into it. I'm sure there might be opportunities there, but we're very much in the same situation as Dominic at Hurst, and our intake starts at 13 plus. And it's important for parents to know, I think, that any recipient of a bursary award, they are assessed annually, so your financial circumstances will be assessed year on year for parity, for clarity, and for absolute fairness. If we had a family who fell on hard times and we bumped up their bursary support one year, then they suddenly had a bumpy year and they could afford the fee, so therefore we could reallocate that bursary provision to another family who's really in need of it. It means we give another opportunity to family. And
equally, I review every single one of our scholars every single year, so they have a 5-minute meeting with me, with the director of music or the director of sport or their head of year, and if they obviously we know in advance if there's going to be a problem, we put intervention in place. But if they've come off the boil, or if they're not contributing, or if their behaviour falls short of expectations, then we do reserve the right to be able to say, actually, we are helping you be in this school and you aren't putting enough effort in. It never really comes to that because usually we can turn these children around. But there is an expectation that the scholars, in our case, who then get the bursary, are then expected to deliver at a certain level.
There are, for the big 13 plus recruiters, then often if you've got a bursary in place for 13 plus, then that school will help you to plug the gap at a prep school for years 7 and 8. So if your child's coming out of the primary system at 11, then a lot of the big 13 plus schools will help you with bursary support for those final 2 years in the prep system. But yes, I mean, before 11, basically the schools are smaller and aren't able to give the same sort of support. Are there any other questions?
Hello. I understand that this would be like by a case-by-case basis, but for those who are on bursaries, you mentioned that they could like have 20% coverage, 40% coverage, it can vary. Is it common to have people receive like 100% coverage? Is that something that's often done, or
Yes, I would say probably ballpark 10% of those children with us. We've probably got 150 or so children who receive bursarial support, and probably 10% of those are on what we call those transformational bursaries. There's probably another 10% on 80 or 90%, and then a bit of a sliding scale below. Other schools will adopt a different approach. We have a certain pot of money for us. We're building towards it being just over £2 million a year in total as a pot that we allocate as best and as fairly as we can. Obviously, if you can find 5 children and give them 50% bursary and their parents can contribute, then that fills your school more than just one child on 100%. And I suppose that's the trade-off that a lot of heads and bursars have to take. But yes, they certainly exist.
I think it's something which which again moves with the landscape as well. I think 5 years ago, the conversations we were having was very much more about transformational bursaries and sort of 75% plus, all the way up to, as they explained, about 110%, where the school will buy you your train ticket to get back to school after an exeat as well. I think now the conversations I've just been having today, actually, funnily enough, since the introduction of VAT, I think schools are beginning to move a little bit back towards more 30, 40, 50% bursaries, and trying to ensure that there's a genuine spectrum and genuine diversity across the school. Otherwise, you end up in this slightly odd position where you've got a few kids who are on 110% bursaries and then everyone else is paying 100% of the fees. Obviously, that's an extreme example, but I think my feeling is that as a sector, we are moving back a little bit away from transformational bursaries back to more of those middle bursaries.
I think it's really, really difficult to generalise across the nation and the individual schools. Each school has a different provision to support their families through the bursary means, and we want to help as many children as possible. So we want to make our decisions through the data that we're provided through BAL and through a very high moral compass of doing the right thing for the children. Sometimes if we can't meet where a family wants us to get to, we might have to part on good terms and say, because they might have other options lined up as well. So sometimes we can't make the figures work, but we always try to.
Yes.
Hi, just a quick question. Can you get more than one scholarship? Is it single point only in terms of for the students? And in addition, can you get a scholarship and a bursary as well? Is that offered in conjunction?
Yes, you can. I think it's important to understand that you don't accumulate extra money off for extra scholarships. So your child can be worthy and meet the requirements of, say, an academic scholarship plus a music scholarship. They might be good enough for a performing arts scholarship. We as schools try to make really good decisions about overloading an individual with the demands and the programme of those, particularly the co-curricular scholarships. And I say this as a musician, and knowing that if you've got musicians and actors and musical theatre people, they are going to be pulled in various directions. So we need to consciously help parents and help the children make really good decisions about what that is going to look like throughout the course of 5 years. And we don't want to overload individuals on those scholarships. And irrespective of how many scholarships you hold, again, like we said, the scholarship is the gateway to opening up means-tested funding, and the amount of funding you get is on your financial circumstances.
Thanks. Just a question, do schools publish the sort of pot that's available per school so that parents know what they're dealing with?
That's a really, really good question. The answer is most schools don't. You can find it, and the way to find it is to go on the Charities Commission website, and then you can download the financial data and the financial reports for the previous academic year. And within that, you'll be able to see the breakdown of fee assistance, which will go to a number of different ways. One is actually staff fee remission. We haven't talked about that, but probably the best way to get money off the fees at one of our schools is come and work for us. Genuinely, that's in many schools it's up to 70 or 80% fee remission for staff. Sometimes that's teaching staff. Sometimes that's all staff. So you'll see that as a breakdown in the accounts. You'll then see scholarships, and then you'll see bursaries. And most schools will declare that pretty openly. What we probably don't do, and probably I speak as a head who doesn't want a hostage to fortune, is to declare very loudly on the website that we're going to put 1.2 million or whatever this year into a particular bursarial fund, because it may be that the financial situation means that we can't honour that. But yes, it's certainly worth sniffing around the accounts of any school that you're looking at, actually, as much as anything else in the current climate, just to check their health and future prospects.
Are there any other questions? Well, you can always come and talk to us on one of our stands. Well, as I say, I really encourage you to go and speak to lots of schools directly. Go and get one of Dominic's magazines. He's desperate for people to take his magazines.
I've carried them all the way up on the train.
I think I might have to take one.
And come and see us on the Good Schools Guide stand if you'd like to. We've got some more information there as well about that, the music scholarships that I was talking about. Yeah, encourage you to go and have lots of conversations, go and ask lots of schools, lots of tricky questions, and enjoy your day. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.